I was telling everyone I feel like Britney Spears with one of these things, so apologies if it falls out. I'm still getting used to it. So I just wanted to kick off the panel asking about the current state of civic engagement in 2020 as we head into this major election year. It seemed like we saw a very high turnout in 2018, especially from a lot of the groups that all of you work with. So starting with you, Susannah, and we can go down, what is the state in terms of women? Because I know you work with engaging women in particular.
Yeah, well, so Running Start works to get young women to see themselves as political leaders. And we do a series of programs, and I always think that my best measurement of sort of the mood of young people in the country is looking at these applications. And this time we've got a huge number applying, much more so actually than 2 years ago. And we actually, I think the most interesting part of it is we have a question saying, would you ever want to run for office? Because a lot of the women, even though our program is all about political leadership training, some of them are like, I want to learn about it, but I don't want to do it. This year, it's like 80% are saying that they want to run for office. So I think that that's a really good sign that politics seems positive right now.
Absolutely. Maria Teresa, what about you?
So I think one of the biggest things that we at Voto Latino, we're super excited about is that we're 15 years young. This is our 15-year anniversary, and it coincides with one of the largest participation opportunities in the Latino community. Since 2016, 4 million young people who heard the president call their families and loved ones criminals and rapists will be eligible to vote for the very first time. Starting in 2016, 1 million young Latinos will turn 18 that won't crest for the next decade. While the majority of whites are 54, the majority of Latinos are 19 years old, and they're participating. Pew just came out with a study yesterday, for those who saw, and basically affirmed that Voto Latino is not on a fool's errand. For the very first time, the young generation in 2018 outpaced older voters. And in 2020, for the very first time, you're going to have 12 million more young voters than baby boomers. And what's neat about that is that 2/3 of them are young people of color. And when you see what it means when young people participate and they go out, all I need to show them now is the 2018 election, where it was the highest participation rate of Americans across the board in 100 years. And young people led the charge. And we saw in January 3rd of last year, the most diverse Congress in our nation's history, women, veterans, people of color, LGBTQ, across the board. That was actually almost fulfilling our Constitution. We're not quite there yet, but we're fulfilling our Constitution. But the diversity is what makes it special. The results is really what should count. There are over 270 pieces of legislation right now that started with the modernization of our election system, background checks, it addresses climate change, and the list goes on. That was passed by the most diverse representative government in our nation's history that now sits at the feet of a Senate that does not necessarily look like America. So our charge in 2020 is to make sure that we keep engaging young people. Our goal is to register over 500,000 individuals in key states and mobilize 1 million. In the 2018 election, Voto Latino registered over 202,000 registered voters, again in key states. We directly impacted and mobilized 77% of them to go vote. We registered over 15% of new Texans. And Texas is exciting for us because it represents 25% of all young Latino eligible unregistered voters, AKA 38 electoral votes. So what gives me hope is the fact that we've done this before, and now our job is collectively to finish the job and do it at scale.
Right. Ben, what about you? And I have to say I'm digging the stocks. They're great.
Thank you. I think for us, we are finally seeing the LGBTQ community realize their political power. There are 57 million equality voters across this country. And when we say equality voters, we mean people that will go to the ballot box and vote for a candidate that is more supportive of LGBTQ issues. That is massive for us. We think that collectively, LGBTQ voters can make the difference in the elections, the same way Latino voters, African-American voters, and women voters do. In the 2018 election, an estimated 7 million LGBTQ voters turned out to vote. We like to think victory ran right through the LGBTQ community. And we are positive that those 7 million people are going to make the difference in the 2020 elections. So we are investing our time in a number of targeted states. engaging our 3 million members and supporters to turn out, volunteer, making sure that they're registered to vote. We have a very active membership. They are voting already at above 80%. There's not much room for us to grow there, but there's room for us to grow with those equality voters. And so we're taking our membership and our supporters and really trying to figure out how we increase turnout. And we're not just doing that for the people that are already voting. We're looking at the low propensity voters. We're looking at the people that don't have a record of voting on a regular basis. And that's who we want to communicate with. And we're spending a lot of money on trying to figure out how to message this election in a way that makes them turn out to vote. And what we did find in the 2018 elections is that the message that works best for us is not our message alone. It is the collective attack that is going on. It is the attack on women. It is the attack on African Americans and Blacks and other people of color. It is the attack on Latinos, as well as LGBTQ people. And so collectively, we're telling that message. We know that we can lift everybody up and hopefully start to make some changes in the Senate and a few other offices that we care about.
Right, and Alejandra, I know you work specifically with Latina voters. Tell me about what the state of their civic engagement.
So to correct the record, I work with all women.
Yeah.
So I,
Okay, yes.
so I represent the YWCA. Let me say that one more time, the YWCA, and we're 162 years young. Right now, again, we have 200 plus associations around the country serving 2.3 million women in 45 states and the District of Columbia, touching over 1,200 communities. I give you that perspective because we have a footprint across the country. Right now, and I do have to put a plug in, we have 2 campaigns going. Why Women Vote, which is our first campaign, and Why Women Count, which is our census campaign. And I'm going to take a minute because these 2 campaigns are monumental. The census in particular, when it comes to women and children and communities of color, there's always an undercount. And if we think strategically, the census is the way our government appropriates dollars and apportions power. Okay? Appropriates dollars and apportions power. So when we're talking about how we change the leadership of our country, if we still have an undercount, guess who will not be represented? So we need to focus on the census. That's one. The second one is we just released our Why Women Counts national survey. And what we found is that 85% of women across the country are excited about this election. Now, I have to make a note because our survey oversampled for communities of color, for women of color, Gen Zs and millennials. And why is that important? Because a lot of our national surveys do not oversample for communities of color because it's more expensive.
Or young people. Yeah, or young people.
So when we're seeing national surveys, you have to be a critical thinker and really ask the question, are they capturing the voices of all potential voters? And the answer is sometimes no. I'm excited because women are looking at leaders, and again, our survey is not about who's running for president only, but it's the county judge, it's the school board, it's the member of Congress, and I have to give a shout out to a woman who I think people need to be paying attention to, Michelle de la Isla. She is the mayor of Topeka, Kansas. She credits the YWCA because it was thanks to our organization that she was able to turn her life around from a survivor of domestic violence to the mayor, and now she's running for Congress. Those are the examples of women across America who are really focused on the issues. And I'm not just speaking about issues that are traditional for women, like reproductive health. It's the environment, it's infrastructure, it's the economy. It's all the issues that impact us. So, I just came from New Hampshire. We had a wonderful roundtable discussion with some of the candidates there. But I do have to say, I'm a 501c3. And the lane that we play in is a lane of making sure that people understand their civic duty in making sure that they participate in the elections. And not just every 4 years, but there's an election happening every year in our country that really defines our community. So I'm excited. I'm an optimist. So
Great. Yeah, definitely. It'll be an exciting year. And Maria Teresa, I know you mentioned this specifically, but I'm a campaign reporter. I've been following the trend of young people and how much they've been involved this cycle in particular. But I do feel like there's always this narrative every election year that young people are apathetic. They don't necessarily care. It's not at the top of their to-do list. But when you actually go out on the trail and talk to these voters, it seems like these young voters don't necessarily know, and they obviously follow the news, but they don't have they're not equipped with the resources like where's their polling place, what candidates are on the ballot and such. So would you all agree with that assessment? And where do young people fall in this equation of civic engagement in 2020?
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, I think that we need to level set. Sometime around the 1970s, we took history, civic education out of the textbooks. So only 8 out of 50 states require young people to learn about civic education in order to graduate from high school. And some of those 8 states means you basically have to teach to a test. So there's a generation and a half that does not know the basic principles of electoral college, of how your vote actually matters, how do you make changes. And I guess the silver lining out of what we're witnessing right now is that the president gives us a civic education exam and example every single day. And so that allows us to see that engagement matters. And when people say, well, young people don't care, I now can proudly show what happens when they mobilize in 2018. And again, they participated. And this is where our opportunity lies. There are only 2 pockets to expand the electoral base in this country. The 12 million plus young people that I just mentioned that will be eligible to vote for the very first time, and 15 million unregistered Latinos, and roughly about 6 to 7 million unregistered immigrants that are eligible to vote, right? There's just very few pools. The beauty of that, poll after poll shows, is that I don't have to convince a young person that climate change is real. How many people believe in climate change? Young people know that it's real. And if we can convince someone that now what they need to do is to register, take 5 minutes out of your time to register and elect someone that actually also believes it's real, that's when we can make major impact and change. I don't have to convince the majority of young people that LGBTQ deserve rights. I don't have to convince people that a DACA recipient should also have a fair shot at this game in the United States. Young people are there. Changing attitudes and behavior is the hardest thing that we have to do. And folks are there when it comes to the young people community. So our job is to close that margin quickly. I do want to say something on the census because what Alejandra is saying is absolutely true. And sometimes we forget, when we do not count a 4-year-old in the census, shame on us when they show up to kindergarten and there's not a desk. Shame on us. Because that young child will not have a desk for the next 10 years. That is what is at stake. We could talk about political power, we could talk about enfranchisement, but we're talking about basic access to achieve the American dream through education. And that's why one of the reasons why the census is so important.
Absolutely. Susannah, I let you jump in on that.
I agree absolutely with everything you said about young people and trying to get them to vote. I also think it's really important to show young people that they can have a voice. Because I think, Running Start deals with young people from early high school all the way through around age 25. And I think the most important message we're giving them is that you can have a voice, you can be a problem solver, you're not too young to actually make a difference. And it's really amazing how quickly they understand that message when you introduce them to amazing people who have run young, who have stepped up into leadership positions. And you can wield power so young. I mean, we have a young woman who just won a school board race. And I think she's like 22. You can actually run even younger. We have a young woman who won a state legislative race at 23. So showing people these examples that, yes, you should definitely vote. Of course you have to vote if you want the world to change and the issues you care about to be addressed. But don't count yourself out of power. Because, you actually have the ability in our government to run at a really early age, and their voices, imagine how amplified their voice is if at 22 they're already in a position where they're making decisions.
And Voto Latino, we took a playbook of that, and we have a conference every year that brings around 400 young people from around the country, and the whole idea is to participate. And 5 years ago, we actually encouraged them to start running for office. And we partnered with Emily's List, and young people are running for office. And the neat thing is in the last 4 years, we've had 6 people run for office. 5 have been the youngest that have won in their elected chambers, from Austin City Council to school boards to Congress. Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez was one of those young women, and it's something that we take great pride in because we're flipping the script. And one of the other things that we developed, though, is in order to close the voter registration gap, is that we realized that absent the government deciding to do universal voting, none of us collectively here on this table can actually close that gap. So we partnered with an organization called Small Planet. They develop Disney apps, and bear with us, and we created an app called Voter Pal. And the whole idea is for young people to register their friends and family. It is now being rolled out by Steve Madden in Steve Madden stores. The App Store in 2018 called it one of the top 4 political apps in the store because it was so easy to use. There's no excuses, but all of a sudden it gives that person agency. That, yes, I've registered. What else can I do? Talk to your friends, get them involved.
I want to talk about the intersectionality. And Ben, I know you guys at the HRC really focus on this. Talk about the unique challenges that maybe members of different minority communities face, or people who are members of multiple minority communities.
Yeah, so LGBTQ people, I mean, we love right at that intersection. I mean, we're Black, white,
You're
Latino,
us, yeah.
Asians. We are the fabric of America. And there is not a group that does not touch us, which means that voter suppression, there is not one person that isn't affected by voter suppression or anything that's going on in this country. And so when we start talking about sort of how it intersects, I go to the trans community, our transgender community. There are states out there that require voter ID laws. There are states out there that says that you can't change your identity, can't change your gender marker on a government ID. And so this is where that intersection starts to lie in for us. On one hand, we have voter ID laws out there. On the other hand, we're fighting for a person to get something as basic as identification so that they can travel, so that they can apply to register to vote, so that they can do basic things. And I think that's where we see sort of this intersection of across race, across gender, just an attack on people's basic rights to vote, to be a productive citizen in our country. And so the intersection sort of creeps up on us at all levels there. And it's not just with our transgender people. You know, we have people that show up to vote, and there is someone there that is interpreting who they are, and make a comment around, like, is this your husband? Is this your wife? And so we are dealing with sort of the approach of how systematically our opponents are attacking us, and how we have to look not just at one group, but across all groups of how we are fighting back against that. And so that's where the intersection lies for us a little bit.
So if I may jump in on that, as the YWCA, we've stood in this space of intersectionality. Our mission statement is eliminating racism and empowering women, because we understood very early on in our 162-year journey that for many, women, and particularly women of color, there is no level playing.
Right.
You know, we're about to celebrate 100 years of the women's right to vote, but what we don't really understand is that it wasn't all women. It was only white women who got the right to vote 100 years ago. Women of color, it took us a longer time. When we talk about the policy issues, because this election is about the issues, right? When we talk about the issues and we see a Senate that has been sitting on the Violence Against Women's Act for the last 4 months, women are concerned, because we are now not only seeing how the politics is impacting us, but especially for women of color, in this country, the most amazing country on the planet, we have a growing maternal and child mortality rate among Black women that is unacceptable. Unacceptable. So for us, as an organization, we stand in this moment of intersectionality every single day. This election is about how do we make sure that we're not just talking about women's issues writ large, but that we're uplifting those women that have been traditionally left behind. And that's, that moves us.
Yeah, and
that's important to sort of turn out, because if we're talking in general terms around issues, we are really not motivating anyone. Color of Change did a survey in 2018, and what they found was that people of color, especially Black people, were motivated more so to vote by their district attorney than any other office out there. And I may be screwing the data up a little bit. But what the data was saying was that they were more concerned about voting for someone that was charging us for putting us in jail for 20 and 30 years for a
Minor
ounce
crimes.
of, a small fraction of marijuana or something like that. Just minor fractions out there. And so we have to be in those intersections of what is going on in the communities that we represent. And they are different in every single community that we're in.
Alejandra, we actually wrote down a quote from you, and I feel like it kind of fits into this conversation really well, but if you could just build upon it. It says, we like to say that not all YWCAs have pools, but we help women when they feel like they're drowning. Could you just build upon that for us?
And that's very true. You know, we get confused with another organization that sounds a little bit the same. We get called, oh, you're the female version of that other organization. And we have to push back and say, no, we're very, very different. We have been marching for some of the most important issues that define women. And it may not be relevant today or seem like a big deal, but we march for the 8-hour work day, which for many folks may think, well, what's the big deal? Well, women were being exploited, right? We have been marching and we've been calling out some of the most important issues for women across the country. And I say that because we're the largest providers of services for survivors of domestic violence. And I'm going to tell you, my job is easy because I'm in Washington, D.C., but the women who lead the YWCA, they are welcoming women who are coming in broken, physically, psychologically, emotionally. So we build them up. And that's why it's so important to make sure that, we support organizations that have been doing this work, because we're the silent entities, nonprofits, and I will give a plug to all of my nonprofit organizations. We pick up where government has kind of left off, where the private sector doesn't think that they should do anything. So we're left picking up the pieces, not only because we want to, but because we have to. So when we talk about, a more perfect union, nonprofit organizations are the ones who continue to weave when the fabric of America is tearing apart. And I think that we have to highlight that, because philanthropy does not do the best of job in keeping us together, in working together and building synergy. We fight for the crumbs, and that is not the way we should be thinking about how we heal our country.
We have a little over 30 seconds left, but quickly, in terms of turnout, looking at 2020, are we expecting larger turnout than 2016? I mean, 2018 was very large, but that was a midterm year, and we know that turnout tends to be a bit lower that year. But what are your predictions?
I'm not predicting anything. The moment that people start listening to polls, they think that they can sit home because someone else is taking care of them and done, and it's done. No, it's all hands on deck. It's the very clear vision. If your buddy says I'm not going, give him a ride. We just partnered with Lyft, so if you need a free ride, come to Voto Latino and we'll give you a free ride. This is all hands on deck. And we can, and I think it is one where we need everybody to know what their rights are, to share what their rights are, because I will share with you that there are shenanigans that will happen. And as an American, as a registered voter, every single person in this room who's eligible, every single one of your loved ones, every single one of your friends, even people who you don't agree with, has a right to participate. That is what makes our country stronger.
Absolutely. Well, thank you I'm sorry.
So I would just say if you look at the research out there, they're estimating that on the low end, 10 million more voters than 2016 is going to vote. And on the high end is 24 million voters. And I agree with you.
Don't read that. I need everybody to go out.
It is about, we have an energized electorate on both sides here. And so when you hear 10 and 24, that doesn't mean that's people that's going to vote the way you want them to vote. That is 10 million to 24 million that are going to be engaged. And we have a responsibility to get involved to create the union that we want to live in, that we want to represent us. And that includes women, LGBTQ folks, Latinos, and every major group that is out there.
Absolutely.
Can I
Oh,
say one,
yes,
like,
yes,
this
of
tiny
course.
thing is that if you look at the women who won in 2018, who were sort of, they were outliers, people didn't think they'd win, and you find out how did they win? They went and they found those people, they knocked on those doors. So I think if we get more diverse candidates running, then hopefully we'll have more voters.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This was so informative. Thank you.